Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agri. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, I'm talking to Jack Wilson, Account Manager for RHIZA. Today, we will be finding out about the services that RHIZA provide and how these can really help farmers, whether arable or livestock, to fine-tune their on-farm precision. What are the benefits and how can these services help? So, good morning, Jack.
Good morning, Tony.
Yeah, great to have you with us today, Jack, and really looking forward to our podcast. To start us off, perhaps you'd like to share a little bit about how did you get into farming and agriculture?
Well, I grew up down in Shropshire it was actually previously a dairy farm. My dad's still running it now, just contract rearing. And I was brought up to Scotland by my other half, Brittany. And then after a few years, I wanted to get back into agriculture. So I applied for a RHIZA soil sampling job, and the rest is history, really.
Oh, that's great, Jack. And I know you're based up there in East Lothian. How are crops looking at the moment?
They're looking well. It's been quite a mild winter, really. We've had quite a kind January. Despite the wind, most of the crops are still standing. And I think sun's come out. It was the 1st of March yesterday, and guys are looking to start getting on and start spreading. So all quite good news, really.
Yes, and it's always great to be able to get back on the land again in the spring, isn't it? Today, our focus is on precision farming and how that can help growers, whether they're growing grass or arable crops, whatever the crop, in fact. So what are the key issues that you think farmers are facing at the moment, Jack?
I think a lot of the time it comes down to the real basics, getting those foundations right. A lot of time when I'm out sampling, I'll see simple things like drainage that obviously needs correcting. When I'm out sampling, we're looking at areas and we're obviously taking samples to get pK and pH. And that pH is really important part as well, not only in certain areas, but across that whole field to make sure it's optimized to get the most use out of your nutrients.
Sure. So you're talking about real sort of on the ground, your boots are muddy, you're walking those crops. What I'm really interested in, though, is the RHIZA services, these digital services that we've spoken about before on these podcasts with some of the guys from RHIZA. And what I'm really interested in is what are those services, and then actually how can they help? So tell me a bit about this digital mapping, etc. What are the services that you offer?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we can do within RHIZA. Previously, we've done something called EC scanning. So that's discs in the ground pulled by either a quad bike or a pickup, and that's measuring the electric conductivity of the soil. So it's giving you a gauge towards the nutrient holding capacity. And then what you can do is use those maps to create zones, we call them. So these are soil zones based on soil types. And then we go out and we sample within these zones. And we do a W sample across that area to give you a nutrient level for that area of the field. Within the last 4 or 5 years, we've started to use imagery. So this is satellite imagery. There's a lot of things you can do with satellite imagery, but one of the things that we've done recently is we've got backdated historic imagery, and we've looked at fields in quite a lot of detail over the last 3 or 4 years, and then we found trends within the crops to suggest where are good areas and bad areas of the fields, and then we can use those images to create the zones and go and do our soil sampling and go and find out why some of these areas aren't performing as well as they could be.
So what I'm hearing there, Jack, is that you're using these measurements, this field mapping, to be able to see, where to go and focus and find out exactly why maybe the yield in that part of the field isn't so good as you would expect. Just going back, what is the nutrient holding capacity of the soil? What influences that?
So it's to do with the amount of clay within the soil, because your clay particles are the main elements of the soil that hold the nutrients. We all talk about sand, silt, and clay and soil textures and things like that. And the amount of clay within a soil has a big impact on the nutrient holding capacity of that soil. So that's where we look at the areas and we say, right, well, this area of the field has got quite a lot of clay. So it's a heavier soil. It's going to hold pH better and hold nutrients better. Whereas the lighter area of the field is more of a sandy soil, a lighter soil. So it won't be able to hold on to those nutrients as well. It's going to leach pH and it's going to lose nutrients much easier.
Sure, and I can understand that. From the farmer's perspective, who's driving a tractor across the field and cultivating, surely they can see where the clay areas of a field are, maybe the siltier areas, the sandier areas. So how do the maps help us understand that differently?
Oh, I mean, you can absolutely see it in the field, and when you're driving across with your plough, you'll know the areas where you have to slow down a little bit, some of those heavier areas, and you can see that shine on that soil when it's turned over. But it's all well and good knowing you have that soil within the field, but what you need to know is exactly where that soil starts and finishes, so that when you've got your crop through the ground and you can't see the soil and you're spreading fertilizer, you've got a plan and you've got a map, something showing you where that line is.
Right. So what you're talking about actually is the real detail, the real precision. So that's that step change from walking the field, knowing your land really, really well, but actually through the season knowing exactly where those lines in the sand are, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And farmers will be able to tell you roughly where they are, but you need to be able to have some sort of system in place where you can tell the machine and the machine can do the work for you and increase, decrease the rate and apply the product where it's needed.
And what impact can that have on, placement of fertilizer and sprays, but also ultimately in terms of efficient production?
Yeah, so we've gone out, we've mapped the farm, whether it's by scanner or imagery, and we've taken our soil samples, and then we can sit down with the farmer and see what he wants to grow in that field, and we have our nutrient result for that zone, so we know if it's slightly low, we want to try and improve the indices. If there's a pH problem, we want to address that as well, and then we also know what the crop's going to take off. So all this information is built into our system, and we can give him a recommendation for fertilizer for those areas, and he can go and apply them using shape files or XML files or whatever he needs to plug into his equipment.
So looking forward, grain prices are looking buoyant. However, input costs are looking very high. How can this way of farming, this precision farming, using these maps, etc., help when it comes to maximizing the bottom line?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it's become a real high stakes game, farming these days, and just putting a crop in is a huge investment. So what you need is as much data as you can possibly get, just so you know what your costs are going to be. And it used to be a case of, all right, I'll put on 2010 or 1616 or whatever it was because I always have. But now we can use this data to really fine tune that plan, that analysis, and we can go on and we can use straits, we can use different products, and we can get the right product that's right for you and right for your farm.
Sure. And you yourself said, you don't want to be just rolling the dice, and that reminds me of what you just said there about it being a high stakes game. I mean, yeah, it's a big investment, isn't it? And a real risk if you get it wrong. So I guess what you're saying here is make informed decisions with as much data as you can get.
Yeah, exactly. And a few guys this year have said, "Oh, I can't afford to put the fertilizer on. I'm gonna just take a P&K holiday," which is fine. But you need to have that data to back up your decision. And like you said, if you haven't got that data, it is a risk and you are just rolling the dice, if you like.
Sure. And Tom Land in previous podcasts has said a similar thing, which is, if you're going to take a P&K holiday, where are you going to do that? What part of the farm, what part of a field? Okay, just coming back to some of this data that you're able to glean, to obtain from RHIZA, just tell me a bit about the different layers of information that through the season you can get hold of.
Yeah, so we've got imagery that is live, if you like. So farmers are getting an image every couple of weeks of their growing crop within the field. Within Contour, our platform as well, you've got all the previous images from previous years. So you can go back and look on how the crop has performed previously. You've got lots of other data like weather data. You can look at how much rainfall you've had this year compared to last year, what the soil temperature's like for your nitrogen timings, and all sorts of things like that.
So sort of just out of pure interest, I mean, how many farmers are using information like this?
Well, I cover the Lothian and Borders, so I'm working a little bit in Fife, right through kind of the Mid Lothians and the Scottish Borders into Northumberland and across the Dumfries. And we, on our system, we have around, last time I checked, about 55,000 hectares. And I would say half of those guys are fully mapped, sampled, and they're creating nutrient plans through myself or through their agri-agronomist to make the most of the system and really take advantage of it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's a beautiful part of the world you're working in there. Fantastic. But 55,000 hectares, I mean, that's a significant amount, isn't it? But it also, from what I can tell, that means that there's an opportunity here for more growers to be using this information to be able to farm with even more precision. Interestingly, I know you also look at a lot of grassland. We mustn't forget that's a huge crop in the UK, isn't it? So tell me a bit about how do you use this information when you're looking at grassland?
Yeah, so precision has always been, a lot of people view it as, oh, it's expensive to get into and there's a lot of equipment required to make the most of it. But in a lot of cases, it comes down to using variable line. So for a lot of time, grassland's been ignored a little bit, and it's not been fully utilized. I mean, there were some figures that only about 20% of the UK grassland is actually fully efficient or run as best as it can be. So what I've been doing is we've been using the imagery to zone the farms, and then we've been creating line plans to optimize the pH. That obviously will give them more nitrogen use efficiency, helps with their P and K uses too. The other big thing for the livestock guys is planning their slurry and muck applications. Too often when I sample a farm, I will find that the field near the steading is the highest in P and K because that's the closest to the cowshed that gets all the muck. And once you've got that map of your whole farm, you can start to target different fields with your organics, and that will help build your nutrients without having to import anything else. You're making use of what you've already got, and not only you're not overdoing it and causing lockup issues in your closer fields, you're improving the fertility in your fields that need it.
So you're using that mapping to really help with the practical farming tasks of, as you said, spreading the slurry, spreading the muck. So that's really working in and tying in with practical farming, isn't it? So what I'm hearing is it's not divorced. It's not I've got data and then I've got practical farming. It's very, very, very much intertwined.
Exactly. We always sit down with a farmer and what tools have you got at your disposal? What can you do? We've got the data here, so let's work together. So I mean, a lot of time with myself and the agri-agronomist, let's work together and come up with a solution that suits you and that's workable for you. Because it's all well and good coming up with brilliant, pretty coloured maps and fancy imagery, but you can actually use that to do something and create plans that the farmers can really use and benefit from.
Yeah. And give me an example of a real, I'm going to put you on the spot here, a real success story that you can think of that comes to top of mind, where you've used this imagery to great benefit.
We did. There was an upland hill farm down in Hoyk that was part of. It was coming under a new tenancy. So the estate agent came to me and sort of said, "Look, we've got a new tenancy agreement coming in. We need to sample the whole farm." And they'd gone out and done some whole field stuff, and the pH was really quite low. So they were looking to spread quite a lot of lime, get the pH to a good level, and get the nutrients to a good level as well. So we got the imagery on the farm. We zoned the whole farm. I actually went out and sampled that one myself. And then we created plans to take the farm from where we had fields at pH of, some of them were down at 5, a lot of them were 5.2. So within RHIZA and Contour, we created plans to get all the fields up to a pH of 6 as a start. That's actually been a 3-year process of applying lime with multiple applications on some fields. And then we used digestate because they have a AD plant at the estate has an AD plant. We created plans to use that product that they already had to get all the nutrient levels of the fields up to target. So the phosphate and potash levels up to an index 2 or 2.5. And we plan to go and resample that field, that whole farm next year. And we've got it all up to where it needs to be now. They've started putting in forage crops. They're looking at reseeding, and from speaking to the farmers who've taken over the farm, they said it's completely different from where it was 2 years ago. So that's quite a short turnaround, you know.
Sure, that's fantastic. And when that farmer said it's completely different, what does that mean when it comes to referring back to your comment about, it's high stakes is farming right now?
Yeah, we're talking about high stakes and farming, and it is a bit of a gamble, but you don't need to gamble on your nutrient statuses. There's tools within Agri and RHIZA to monitor these and know exactly what they are and correct them if they need correcting. And a lot of some guys have been over applying in areas which is very expensive, especially now with the price of fertilizer. And some guys have been slightly under applying in areas which has a yield limitation as well. So we need to be putting the right nutrient in the right area, and by getting your farm mapped and using RHIZA and Agri, we can do that for them.
And Jack, just as we finish this podcast, what would be your takeaway message that you would like farmers and growers to think about after listening to this podcast?
I always try and tell people to, invest in your soil. You've only got one set. It's there for life. And that's whether it's grazing cattle, whether it's crops, whether it's silage or anything, you need to make sure you're benefiting as much as you can. So yeah, invest in your soil, take samples, do it as accurately as you can, map your whole farm so you put in the right inputs in the right areas in the most effective and efficient way.
Fantastic. Jack, thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today and getting a real insight into how you're using these mapping services to really help even transform some of the farm clients that you're looking after up there in the Borders and Northumberland and that beautiful part of the country. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions you'd like us to ask the experts, email info@agri.co.uk. See you next time.